The rain fell heavy on San Francisco's Mission District, the kind of rain that made everything feel both more lonely and more alive. Marcus sat in the corner of the coffee shop where he'd been working for the past 3 years, watching the droplets race down the window. It was 6 p.m. on a Thursday, and he should have left an hour ago, but the apartment waiting for him felt too quiet, too empty, too reflective of the space that had opened inside his chest. 28 years old and somehow still waiting for his life to begin. That was the thought that kept him company most mornings when he woke up. Marcus had moved to San Francisco when he was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in graphic design and a burning need to prove something to his family back in Atlanta. His parents had accepted his sexuality with the kind of political correctness that felt like distance. They used the right words, went to the right events, but something fundamental had shifted in their eyes the day he came out. His father had excused himself to the garage. His mother had asked if he was sure, as if it were a phase he could reconsider like a haircut. San Francisco was supposed to be the place where he could be himself without that careful surveillance. And it was, in the way that a city of 800,000 people could make you feel simultaneously free and utterly unseen. He'd had relationships, 3 serious ones actually. There was David, who wanted to save the world but couldn't save their relationship from his own restlessness. Then came Jason, who was perfect on paper but whose touch had never quite sent electricity through Marcus's nervous system. And finally there was Robert, brilliant, intense Robert, who wanted Marcus to be someone slightly different than who he was, not in a deliberate way. Just in the small, accumulating ways that eventually felt like erasure. Since Robert, it had been 2 years of carefully constructed solitude. Marcus had poured himself into his work at Nexus Creative, a mid-sized design firm in Soma. He'd gotten good, really good. He'd been promoted to creative director, which meant he spent his days solving other people's problems, which was easier than solving his own. The truth was, Marcus didn't believe in love anymore, not the kind that lasted anyway. He believed in chemistry and companionship and the temporary relief of human connection. But the deep, transformative, can't imagine your life without this person kind of love, he'd stopped believing in that the same way he'd stopped believing in Santa Claus, with a mix of relief and loss. "You're doing the thing again," a voice said, pulling him from his thoughts. Marcus looked up to find his best friend Simone sliding into the chair across from him. She was shaking rain from her curly hair, and her dark eyes held the particular exasperation that came from years of watching him spiral internally. "What thing?" Marcus asked, though he knew exactly what thing. "The staring into the middle distance while pretending you're okay thing. It's very brooding, very romantically tragic, very boring because I've seen it 1,000 times." She reached over and stole his coffee, taking a sip and making a face. "This is cold. You've been here hours." "I was working on the Castellano pitch." Simone set the cup down carefully. "Marcus, it's Thursday evening. The pitch isn't until Monday. You've been working on it for weeks. It's perfect. You're perfect. And you're alone in a coffee shop watching rain like you're in an indie film about your own sadness." This was what Simone did. She loved him with such directness that it was sometimes painful. They'd met in college and had been inseparable ever since, which meant she'd watched his entire romantic history unfold from the front row. She knew his patterns as well as he did, maybe better. "I'm fine," Marcus said, and they both heard the lie in it. "You're not fine, you're in a rut, a sexual, emotional, intellectual rut. You need something to shake you up." Marcus laughed despite himself. "Like what? A meteor strike, a personal crisis?" "Like saying yes to something you'd normally say no to." Simone pulled out her phone. "My work is having a gallery show next Friday, at the exposition in Soma. You're coming and you're going to be social. No hiding in corners, no leaving early, and no spiraling about how you don't belong there." Simone was a photographer whose work had begun gaining real recognition. Her exhibitions usually attracted an interesting crowd: artists, writers, tech people, the full San Francisco mix. Normally, Marcus did hide in corners at these events. "I don't know," he started. "Not an option. You're coming and you're going to let yourself enjoy it." She stood up. "Now come on, let's get dinner, real dinner, not whatever sad sandwich you were probably planning to eat at your desk." As they left the coffee shop and headed into the rain-washed streets of the Mission, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. Not because Simone was right, though she usually was, but because the weight in his chest felt heavier somehow. As if his heart was trying to tell him something important. As if it knew that in 7 days everything would change. The exposition was exactly the kind of venue that made Marcus simultaneously uncomfortable and fascinated. It was a converted warehouse space in Soma, with exposed brick, high ceilings, industrial lighting, and carefully curated chaos. Simone's photographs were arranged throughout the space, large format prints showcasing Black and queer life in San Francisco, intimate portraits that captured something essential about her subjects. They were stunning. Marcus stood in front of one of them, a portrait of two older Black men holding hands outside a community center, their faces lined with life and love and history. Simone had a gift for capturing the quiet moments that contained entire universes of meaning. "They're beautiful," a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find a man about his age, maybe a year or two older, studying the same photograph. He was tall, with the kind of posture that suggested both confidence and a slight awkwardness, as if he was still getting used to taking up space. His skin was warm brown and he had close-cropped hair and a beard that looked soft. But it was his eyes that stopped Marcus in his tracks. They were dark and serious and thoughtful, and they were looking at the photograph with genuine emotion. "They are," Marcus agreed. "The photographer is a friend of mine." The man smiled and something in Marcus's chest shifted. It was a slow, genuine smile that started small and opened up his whole face. "That's incredible. Her work is, it's honest. You can feel the love and respect she has for her subjects." "I'm Marcus," he heard himself say. "I'm the friend." "James." The man extended his hand, and when Marcus shook it, the contact felt charged in a way that made him immediately want to pull away and simultaneously want to stay connected forever. "I'm terrible at these things, by the way. I came because a colleague insisted, and I've been standing in front of this photograph for 5 minutes trying to gather the courage to approach it properly." Something about his honesty was disarming. Most people at gallery openings came with their armor polished and their opinions ready. James seemed genuinely uncertain, genuinely present. "You're approaching it properly," Marcus said. "You're experiencing it, not performing your experience. That's all anyone can ask." They talked for an hour. Marcus lost track of time in a way that hadn't happened in years. James was a therapist, a psychologist specifically, who worked with trauma survivors and at-risk youth. He was from Portland originally, had moved to San Francisco 3 years ago, lived in the Mission just a few blocks from Marcus. He loved old books and terrible reality television and hiking in Marin County. He had a rescue dog named Pepper who was part German Shepherd and part mystery. He laughed easily and asked good questions and had a way of looking at you that made you feel seen. It was dangerous, Marcus realized, this feeling of being truly seen by another person. "I should probably circulate," James said at one point, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. "But I don't really want to." "You don't have to," Marcus said quietly. "We could stay here, or there's a bar a couple blocks away. They make incredible cocktails." James looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see something shifting in his expression. A recognition, perhaps, or a hope. "Yeah," James said. "Yeah, I'd like that." The bar was a small, quiet place in the Mission that specialized in craft cocktails and had a low lighting that made everything feel intimate. They sat in a corner booth, and Marcus thought distantly that Simone would probably make a joke about his preference for corners, and ordered drinks and fell into conversation with the ease of two people who had been waiting to meet each other without knowing it. James talked about his work with a passion that was evident in every word. He described sitting with a teenager who'd experienced violence, teaching her grounding techniques, watching as she slowly learned to trust her own nervous system again. He talked about the weight of holding other people's pain and the incredible privilege of witnessing their healing. There was no pretense in him, no performance, just a genuine commitment to making life better for people who'd been broken by circumstance. "That sounds exhausting," Marcus said. "It is," James admitted. "But it's also the most meaningful thing I've ever done. Some days I go home and I'm completely depleted. But other days I see someone have a breakthrough, or I see them laughing with their friends for the first time since I've known them, and it reminds me why it matters." Marcus found himself telling James about his work too, about the satisfaction of taking a client's vision and making it real, about the creative problem-solving that he loved, but also about the gnawing sense that he was using his talents to sell things that didn't really matter. "Have you considered doing something else?" James asked. "Like what?" Marcus said. "It's a good job, pays well, steady work. But does it fulfill you?" Marcus opened his mouth to give the expected answer, that fulfillment was something you found outside of work, that nobody's job was their passion, but he found himself being honest instead. "No," he said, "not for a long time." James leaned forward. "Then maybe that's what needs to change." They stayed at the bar until it closed. By the time they left, Marcus felt like his chest had been cracked open in the most terrifying and beautiful way. When James walked him to the bus stop, they stood under a streetlight with the cool San Francisco night air around them, and neither of them moved to leave. "Can I get your number?" James asked. "I'd like to see you again, not in a casual way, in a deliberate, I'd really like to explore this way." Marcus gave him his number, and James called it right then so Marcus would have his number too. After James left, Marcus stood at the bus stop for a long time, just holding his phone, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, possibility, the terrifying sensation of opening himself up to the idea that maybe, just maybe, love could be real. But with the hope came the fear, because Marcus had been hurt before, because he'd learned that people could look at you with genuine affection and still leave when things got complicated. Because he'd spent 2 years building walls, and now this man had appeared and made him want to tear them all down. His phone buzzed with a text from James. "I had an incredible time tonight. Thank you for letting me interrupt your evening." Marcus typed and deleted a response 3 times before finally settling on, "Best interruption I could ask for." They started seeing each other regularly. It was slow at first: dinner, coffee, walks through the Mission and over the hills of San Francisco. James would text him thoughts he'd had during the day, a song that reminded him of a conversation they'd had, a photograph in a newspaper that he thought Marcus would appreciate, a stupid joke that probably shouldn't be funny but that made him laugh. Marcus, who prided himself on his independence and his careful emotional distance, found himself doing the same. He'd be at work in the middle of a design meeting and he'd suddenly think of something James had said and he'd have to hide a smile. The other designers noticed. Simone definitely noticed. "Oh my God, you're smiling," she said one day, coming into his office without knocking. "You're actually smiling, like a real smile, not the one you do when clients are being ridiculous. You met someone." "I did actually," Marcus admitted. "At your gallery show. His name is James." Simone squealed an actual squeal and demanded to know everything. Marcus found himself telling her more than he usually would, describing James in detail, laughing at things he'd said, revealing in the process just how deeply he was already falling. "This is good," Simone said, sitting on his desk. "This is really good. You deserve this." "We've been on like 5 dates," Marcus said. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." But they were already ahead of themselves. By the 5th date, James had admitted that he'd Googled Marcus's work and was impressed. By the 6th, Marcus had met Pepper and spent an afternoon at James's apartment playing with the dog and eating Thai food. By the 7th, they'd kissed, really kissed, and it had been nothing like the tentative first kisses Marcus had experienced with other men. It was a full-body experience, a recognition, a coming home. After that kiss, lying in James's bed with the San Francisco fog pressing against the windows, James had said something that would stay with Marcus forever. "I know this is fast," James said, running his fingers through Marcus's hair. "And I know you probably have reasons to be cautious, but I need to be honest with you. I think I'm falling in love with you, and I'm not saying that to pressure you or to rush anything. I'm just saying it because I believe in honesty and I believe in telling people how you feel before it's too late." Marcus had felt something crack open inside him at those words, not in a bad way but in the way that creates space for something new to grow. "I'm scared," he'd said. "I know," James replied. "I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." 3 months into their relationship, Marcus started to feel like he was living someone else's life. A good life, but someone else's. James was everything Marcus had been afraid to let himself want: present, honest, genuinely interested in Marcus as a person. He remembered things Marcus said in passing and would follow up about them days later. He brought Marcus coffee on Saturday mornings. He'd learned that Marcus got anxious about client presentations and would text him encouragement right before. He was perfect in a way that terrified Marcus because he knew from experience that perfect things could fall apart. The other thing that terrified him was how much he loved James. Love had snuck up on him when he wasn't looking, settling into his bones until he couldn't imagine his life without this man in it. But love required vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risk. They'd been dating for about 5 months when James brought up the future. They were lying in bed on a Sunday morning and James was reading while Marcus worked on a freelance project. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, looking up from his book. "A project," Marcus said. "A client wants me to redesign their entire brand identity. It's actually kind of exciting." "You should do it," James said. "As freelance work, you could leave Nexus." Marcus sat up. "That's a big assumption." "Is it?" James set his book down. You've been unhappy there for years, you've told me that multiple times, you've also shown me some of the freelance work you've been doing and it's light years better than what you do at the firm. You're so much more engaged with it, you have ideas that matter to you. It's not stable, Marcus said. Freelance work isn't reliable income. Not at first, James agreed, but you're talented enough to build a client base, and in the meantime, he paused and Marcus could see him gathering courage for something. In the meantime, we could make it work. I make decent money. We could move in together, share expenses. You could have the time to build something that actually means something to you. Marcus felt every defense wall he'd ever built suddenly vibrate. Are you saying that because you want to live together or because you think I need fixing? Neither, James said, sitting up too. I'm saying it because I love you and I want to see you happy, and I want to live with you because I'm in love with you and the idea of waking up to you every day sounds better than not doing that. Those are two separate things, but they're both true. This was the problem with James. He was so genuinely forthcoming about his emotions that it made Marcus's usual defense mechanisms feel ridiculous. How could Marcus protect himself against a man who just laid everything out plainly? That's a big step, Marcus said. I know, James replied. We can take it slow, or we don't have to do it at all if you're not ready, but I want you to know that I'm ready. I'm ready for this for us. Marcus thought about that conversation for days. He ran through all the scenarios in his head. What if they moved in together and discovered they weren't compatible on a daily basis? What if James decided Marcus's baggage was too much to handle? What if Marcus's patterns of self-sabotage destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him? But underneath all those fears was a deeper truth. He was already all in with James. He was already committed to this relationship in every way except the official acknowledgement of it. Moving in together, building a life together, committing to this man, these things didn't increase his risk. They just made the risk honest. 2 weeks later, Marcus gave his resignation letter to his boss at Nexus Creative. He wrote it carefully, professionally, with gratitude for the opportunities and the growth he'd experienced there. And then he felt lighter than he had in years. He and James started looking for a 2-bedroom apartment together, something in the Mission where they could both walk to work, somewhere with good light, somewhere that felt like a home and not just a place to sleep. They found a place on Valencia Street, a beautiful pre-war building with hardwood floors and big windows and a small balcony that looked out over the neighborhood. It was expensive, but between James's salary and Marcus's growing freelance clientele, they could make it work. James helped him move. Simone helped him move. Even some of his co-workers from Nexus came over to help, which moved Marcus more than he expected. He'd built community in San Francisco, he realized. He'd built a life. The night they moved into their new apartment, they ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor in the middle of the empty living room. Pepper curled up between them, content in her new space. To new beginnings, James said, raising his beer bottle. To us, Marcus replied. James leaned over and kissed him, slow and deep, and Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Not the temporary contentment of a good evening, but a bone-deep sense of rightness. This was what he'd been looking for his whole life, he realized. Not the fireworks and the drama that he'd been taught constituted great romance, but this, the quiet presence of someone who saw you clearly and loved you anyway. Someone you could build something real with. Part 2, Complications. If Marcus had believed in movies or fairy tales, he might have expected that once they got together and moved in and committed to each other, the hard part would be over. Instead, he was learning that actually the hard part was just beginning. It started small, 6 months into living together when James's work began bleeding into their home life in unexpected ways. He'd get calls at night, kids in crisis, families in emergency, and he'd take them in the bedroom, his voice low and serious. Marcus understood that the work was important. But there was something about hearing James's comforting voice drift through the walls, knowing he was holding space for someone else's trauma, that triggered something in Marcus. An old fear that he wasn't enough, that someone else would always need James more than Marcus did. It was irrational and he knew it, but knowing something was irrational didn't stop him from feeling it. The other thing was that James wanted to deepen their relationship in ways that terrified Marcus. He wanted to talk about their future in concrete terms. He wanted to know if Marcus ever thought about marriage, about maybe having kids someday. He wanted to meet Marcus's family properly, wanted Marcus to come out to his own parents in a less politically correct way, wanted Marcus to integrate him fully into every part of his life. Marcus could feel himself pulling back even as he wanted to move forward. It was a familiar pattern from his past relationships. The closer things got, the more he wanted to protect himself by creating distance. One night, 8 months after they'd moved in together, it came to a head. They'd had a good day. Marcus had signed 2 new clients that morning and was feeling optimistic about his business. James had a breakthrough with a teenage client that had shaken him but also reminded him why he did the work. They'd planned to cook dinner together, something they didn't do often enough. But as Marcus was in the kitchen preparing vegetables, James came in and announced that they needed to talk about something serious. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked immediately, his heart rate spiking. "Nothing's wrong," James said. I need to know where you stand on some things, and I feel like you've been avoiding this conversation for months." They moved to the living room and James laid it out. He asked Marcus directly, did he see a future with him? Did he want to get married someday? Did he want kids? Was he genuinely committed to building a life together, or was he still, in some fundamental way, keeping one foot out the door? Marcus felt his defenses spring up immediately. "Why does everything have to be so concrete with you? Why can't we just enjoy what we have right now?" "Because I'm 31 years old," James said quietly. "And I don't want to waste time with someone who isn't sure about me. I understand that you've been hurt. I understand that you're scared, but I need to know if you're actually in this or if you're just here because it's convenient right now." "That's not fair," Marcus said. "You know how I feel about you." "Do I?" James's voice was steady, not angry but sad. "Because from where I'm sitting, I'm doing all the emotional labor in this relationship. I'm the one saying I love you first. I'm the one initiating conversations about where this is going. I'm the one being vulnerable. And you're good at loving me when things are easy. But when I ask you to commit to anything beyond the present moment, you shut down." Marcus stood up. "I came out to my family because of you. I left my job because of you. I moved in with you. Those aren't easy things." "I know," James said. "And I'm grateful for all of that, but those things were prompted by me pushing you. I need to know that you want to commit, not because I've convinced you to, but because you actually want to build a future with me." Marcus paced the living room. "What do you want me to say? That I'm going to marry you and have your children and we'll grow old together? What if I can't promise that? What if I'm just not capable of the kind of forever commitment you're asking for?" Even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He was absolutely capable of it. He was already doing it emotionally, but saying it out loud made it real in a way that felt dangerous. "Then we need to have a different conversation," James said. "Because I'm looking for a partner, someone who wants what I want, and if that's not you, then as much as I love you, we need to figure out how to untangle this." The words hung in the air between them, and Marcus felt something crack inside him. For the first time in their relationship, James had explicitly said that he might leave, that his love, which had felt unconditional, had actual conditions, that he could decide at any moment that Marcus wasn't worth the pain. "I need to go out," Marcus said. "Marcus," James started. But Marcus was already grabbing his keys, already heading for the door. He walked for hours through the Mission and into the Castro and across downtown San Francisco, thinking about patterns and fear and the way he'd spent his whole life running from exactly this moment. The moment where someone demanded that he choose between protection and love, and he had to acknowledge that he couldn't have both. By the time he came home, it was after midnight. James was still awake, reading in bed. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "You're right about all of it." James sat up. "I don't want to be right. I want to understand what's happening with you." Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment. This was where he could give his usual half-truths and emotional distances, or he could actually be honest. Could actually let James see the scared person underneath all the protection. "I'm afraid," he said quietly. "I've been afraid since the day you told me you were falling in love with me. I'm afraid that I'm going to mess this up. I'm afraid that if I commit fully, you'll realize that I'm not actually the person you think I am. I'm afraid that love is something that happens to other people, not me. I've had it confirmed multiple times that I'm not capable of sustaining it." "That's not true," James said. "You don't know that," Marcus said. "You've only known me for a year. You haven't seen me at my worst yet. You haven't lived through my patterns long enough to realize that I'm fundamentally broken in ways that even therapy can't fix." James reached over and pulled Marcus toward him. "I don't want to fix you. You're not broken, you're hurt. There's a difference, and I've absolutely seen you at your worst. You're being it right now, actually, catastrophizing and self-sabotaging. And I'm still here. I'm still going to be here tomorrow and next year and in 10 years if you let me." "How can you be so sure?" Marcus asked. "How do you know this will last?" I don't, James admitted. I don't know the future any more than you do, but I know that I love you. I know that loving you is worth the risk, and I'm asking you to believe the same thing. Marcus felt tears slide down his face and he let himself cry. Actually cry, not just tear up, but let himself feel the full weight of his fear and his vulnerability and his desperate desire to have what James was offering. I want to be the person you think I am, he said. I want to be capable of forever. You don't have to become someone else, James said. You just have to let yourself want it. You have to let yourself believe that you deserve it. They held each other that night and something shifted. Not everything Marcus's fears didn't magically disappear, but he made a choice. He chose consciously and deliberately to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop, to stop treating this relationship like something temporary that he was just passing through, to actually commit in the way James needed him to building a life together. The next few months were hard in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. Working through his patterns meant having difficult conversations. It meant being called out when he retreated emotionally. It meant admitting over and over that he was afraid. But it also meant that his relationship with James deepened in ways that felt genuine and real. James suggested that Marcus see a therapist, and at first Marcus was resistant. But eventually he found someone, an older queer man named Dr. Akaffer, who had an office in the mission and an uncanny ability to cut through Marcus's bullshit while also treating him with genuine compassion. In therapy, Marcus started unpacking the roots of his patterns. He talked about his parents and the way he'd learned that acceptance could be withdrawn if you weren't the right kind of person. He talked about his early relationships and the ways they'd reinforced his belief that he wasn't capable of lasting love. He talked about the defenses he'd built and why they'd seemed necessary at the time. The question, Dr. Akaffer said one day, is not whether you're capable of lasting love. You clearly are. You're demonstrating that with James. The question is whether you're willing to believe that you deserve it. That became the work. Slowly, over months, Marcus began to reprogram his internal narrative. He started noticing the moments when he wanted to pull away and asking himself why. He started saying things out loud that he'd only thought internally. He started allowing James to see him in his vulnerability without automatically assuming that vulnerability would be used against him. James was infinitely patient through all of this. He'd come home from work and Marcus would have some realization, some small breakthrough, and James would celebrate it with him. He'd wake up in the middle of the night with Marcus having a panic attack about commitment and would simply hold him and remind him that he wasn't going anywhere. A year and 3 months into their relationship, James took Marcus to dinner at a restaurant in the mission that had been special to their early dates. It was the same place where they'd gone the night they met at the gallery opening, and Marcus recognized it the moment they walked in. "Is this?" Marcus started. "Yes," James said. "I wanted to come back here. I wanted to mark the moment." They ordered the same cocktails they'd had that first night and they talked about how much had changed. About Marcus quitting his job and building his freelance business. About them moving in together. About Marcus starting therapy and working through his stuff. About how much better things were and also how much work they still had ahead of them. After dinner, as they were walking home through the mission, James stopped on the sidewalk and pulled Marcus aside. "I have something I need to say," he said. "And I want you to know that I'm doing this the traditional way because I'm a little traditional and because I think some things deserve ceremony." James got down on one knee right there on the sidewalk in front of a shuttered storefront and the faint sounds of the city around them, and he pulled out a simple silver ring. "Marcus, I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing in front of that photograph at Simone's show. I have loved you through your resistance and your fear and your beautiful, painful journey toward opening yourself up. I have loved you as you've grown and changed and let yourself become the man you're meant to be, and I would like to keep loving you if you'll have me. Will you marry me?" Marcus heard his own sob before he registered what had happened. His legs gave out and James had to catch him as he also knelt down, and they ended up laughing and crying there on the sidewalk like the most cliché proposal ever, which somehow made it perfect. "Yes," Marcus said. "Yes, absolutely yes, forever yes." James slipped the ring on his finger and Marcus looked at it in disbelief. The silver caught the streetlight and he traced his fingers over the simple band. It was real. This was real. He was getting married. Part 3 Home. Planning a wedding was something Marcus had never expected to do. Growing up in Atlanta, even as he was coming out and claiming his identity, there had always been this assumption that his life would follow a different trajectory than his parents'. He'd be successful and independent, yes, but there'd been a low-level hum of expectation that the romantic milestones, marriage, children, were things other people did. But now, he was doing them. Now he was picking out flowers and guest lists and menus with James, and it felt less like he was pretending to be someone else and more like he was finally becoming the person he was always meant to be. They decided on a small wedding. James's parents were coming from Portland. His dad retired from engineering, his mom a former professor of English literature. Marcus's parents were also coming, which involved a number of long phone calls where Marcus had to explain that yes, he was getting married to a man, and no, that didn't feel strange anymore, and yes, they should feel free to bring their friends because he was done hiding. Simone was going to be his best man and James's sister was going to be in the wedding party. They'd secured a venue in Marin County, a beautiful garden space overlooking the water where they could gather everyone they loved in one place. But before the wedding, something happened that almost derailed everything. Marcus's father had a heart attack. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Marcus was working on a design project for a client. His mother's voice was shaky, frightened in a way he'd never heard before, and she was telling him about the chest pain and the ambulance and the hospital. Marcus's world narrowed immediately to that moment, that call, that knowledge that his father might not be okay. He got on the first flight to Atlanta. James wanted to come with him, but Marcus insisted he stay. This was family business and Marcus needed to handle it alone. Besides, James had a client conference he'd been planning for weeks. "Are you sure?" James asked the night before he left. "I'm sure," Marcus said, but he wasn't. He wasn't sure about anything except that he needed to go home and face his father and the complicated relationship they'd been navigating for years. His father's heart attack wasn't severe, thankfully. He'd caught it early enough that the damage was limited, and with medication and lifestyle changes, he was expected to make a full recovery. But the experience had shaken something loose in the family structure. For the first time, Marcus's parents seemed to realize that their time with their children was finite, that there were things left unsaid, that perhaps the careful distance they'd maintained with Marcus for all these years was less important than actually connecting with their son. 3 days after his father came home from the hospital, Marcus was sitting with him in the living room of the house he'd grown up in. His mother was in the kitchen, giving them space. His father looked smaller somehow, diminished by the heart attack and the fear. "I've been thinking," his father said slowly, "about what you said at Thanksgiving, about bringing James to meet us properly, about wanting us to actually accept you, not just tolerate you." Marcus didn't say anything. He'd learned that sometimes his father needed silence to find his words. "I haven't been a very good father," his dad continued, "about this. Anyway, when you came out, I was afraid. I was afraid of what it meant and what it would change and what other people would think."